The small town of Maplewood had always been quiet, peaceful even. Its cobbled streets and quaint cottages seemed to exist in a different time, where nothing ever went wrong, and the only noise to be heard was the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But there was something unusual about this town. Behind its calm exterior, there was a mystery that no one could quite solve until Detective Oliver Finch arrived. Oliver wasn't your typical detective. He didn't rely on the usual suspects or the conventional tools of investigation. No, Oliver had a secret weapon: animals. In a town full of creatures who observed every corner of life, from the scurrying squirrels to the wise old owl, Oliver had found that animals knew more than anyone could imagine. And he, with his sharp mind and endless curiosity, was determined to use that knowledge to unravel the town's many mysteries. Oliver Finch wasn't an ordinary man. Standing at just over 6 feet tall, his sharp blue eyes seemed to always be searching for something more than what met the eye. He wore a worn-out leather jacket, a symbol of his years spent traveling from one town to the next, never truly settling anywhere. His heart, however, had always belonged to Maplewood. He had once visited as a young man, drawn by its quiet charm and the peculiar tales the villagers whispered. But it was the animals, their secrets, their intelligence, that had truly captivated him. For years, Oliver had worked as a private detective in various cities, solving cases that others thought unsolvable. But nothing compared to the intrigue that the animals of Maplewood presented. It wasn't just that they could understand him, no, that was just the beginning. Over time, he had come to realize that animals knew things. They observed, they listened, and sometimes, they spoke. "I knew you'd be back," said the old dog, Rufus, one chilly autumn morning, as Oliver strolled into the village square. The dog had been waiting for him, just as he always had. "You know I can't stay away, Rufus," Oliver replied, crouching down to scratch the dog's ears. Rufus had seen more than any human ever could, and his insights were often the key to solving the most perplexing cases. Oliver had settled in Maplewood a few months ago, determined to make it his home. He had long been fascinated by the relationship between humans and animals, how each species seemed to have its own role in the grand puzzle of life. Oliver's philosophy was simple: the world was full of untold stories, waiting to be uncovered through those who observed, those who listened. And what better listeners than the animals? The town was as picturesque as it was mysterious. Nestled between rolling hills and a dense forest, it was a place where time seemed to slow down. Yet, for all its charm, there was a persistent undercurrent of unease. Strange occurrences were becoming more frequent, objects disappeared, strange noises echoed through the woods at night, and people reported seeing strange lights in the sky. The townsfolk, ever so cautious, kept to themselves, but Oliver knew something was amiss. He had been hired to solve a string of unexplained events that had the town on edge. It all began one fateful evening when a local farmer, Mr. Harris, arrived at Oliver's door. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "You've got to help me, detective," he exclaimed, nearly breathless. "Something is out there. In the field. I've never seen anything like it." "What exactly happened, Mr. Harris?" Oliver asked, his voice calm but firm, the detective in him coming alive. The farmer looked around nervously before leaning in closer. "I was in the barn, minding my business, when I heard a strange noise outside. I went to check, and I saw it, something big, something moving fast. And then it vanished into thin air. I don't know what to make of it." Oliver took a moment, then stood up, adjusting his coat. "You're not the first to report strange happenings. I'll get to the bottom of this." His eyes scanned the room, and he smiled. "But I'll need help." The next day, Oliver made his way to the forest at the edge of Maplewood, where the animals would be his first source of information. The birds had been chirping frantically, warning each other of something, but what exactly, Oliver didn't know. He needed answers, and the animals always had them. The first creature he spoke to was Gerald, the large, sagely owl who had lived in the ancient oak tree for as long as anyone could remember. "Gerald," Oliver called out as he approached the tree. "I need to know what's been happening around here." The owl blinked, his golden eyes gleaming with a hint of wisdom. The forest is changing, detective. There are things out there that don't belong. Creatures, shadows, and something else, something darker. Oliver's heart quickened. This was the break he needed. But it wasn't just the forest that was hiding secrets. As Oliver moved through the town, he spoke with many of the town's animals. Each had seen or heard something that didn't quite add up. A family of rabbits had spotted strange lights near the riverbank. A pair of squirrels had heard whispers in the woods after dark. Even the local cat, who was usually aloof and uninterested in such matters, had seen a shadowy figure moving through the alleys. Yet, despite all the clues, something didn't sit right with Oliver. The pieces weren't falling into place. There was more to this than strange happenings in the woods. There was something deeper, something that had been hidden for years. That night, Oliver sat by his desk, poring over his notes, when a soft tap on the window broke his concentration. He opened it, and in flew a raven, dark, sleek, and with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "I have something to show you," the raven said, its voice raspy but clear. Oliver raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" The raven's eyes gleamed with urgency. "Follow me, and you'll understand." With a sense of rising tension, Oliver followed the raven into the night. As he stepped into the dark woods once again, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mystery was about to take a turn he wasn't ready for. The animals knew everything, and it was time for them to reveal their deepest secrets. Oliver Finch had always been a man who thrived on the thrill of solving puzzles, but even he hadn't expected the strange series of events that unfolded that night. The raven's call had beckoned him into the woods, and despite the chill in the air, he couldn't shake the sense that something was about to change. He had been following clues for days, piecing together strange occurrences in Maplewood, and now, the animals were leading him into the unknown. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the moonlight flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows across the path. The raven, flying just ahead of him, seemed to be waiting for him to catch up. "Where are we going?" Oliver asked, his voice breaking the silence. "You'll see," the raven responded cryptically. Its voice seemed almost too wise for its small frame. Oliver's heart raced, though not from fear. His curiosity pushed him forward, each step more urgent than the last. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, and he could hear the distant rustle of leaves as the wind blew through the canopy. The forest was alive with the sound of nature, but there was something different tonight. It felt as though the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, the raven darted down toward the ground, landing on a branch low enough for Oliver to reach. "Look," it squawked, its beady eyes locking onto him. Oliver crouched down, his gaze following the birds. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the clearing ahead, a thick mist curled and danced, and within it, shadows moved, large, shifting shapes that didn't belong in the forest. It wasn't just an animal or a trick of the light, something unnatural was lurking in the fog. Oliver's instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he couldn't. He needed answers. The raven's voice cut through the silence once again. "They're here." "Who?" Oliver asked, his pulse quickening. "The ones causing the disturbance," the raven said. "They're not from here." Oliver squinted into the mist, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. He couldn't make out the figures clearly, but something in the way they shifted unnerved him. He stepped forward, determined to uncover the truth, but the raven's voice stopped him. "Not yet," the raven warned, its tone low and serious. "They will sense you." Oliver hesitated. The situation had taken an unexpected turn, and he was now faced with something he hadn't anticipated, something dark and dangerous. But his resolve was unshakable. If the animals were right, these creatures were connected to the disturbances in Maplewood, and if they were causing harm, it was up to him to stop them. As if on cue, a figure emerged from the mist. It was tall and slender, its features obscured by a cloak of shadow. Oliver's breath caught in his throat as the figure moved closer, the silence around it oppressive. "Who are you?" Oliver called, his voice louder than he intended, but there was no turning back now. The figure didn't respond, but its presence felt like a challenge, as though it were daring him to come closer. The raven flapped its wings nervously. "You should leave, detective. It's not safe." But Oliver ignored the bird's warning. There was something about this moment, something that tugged at his sense of duty. He couldn't walk away now. He had to understand what was happening to Maplewood, and these figures were the key. He took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I won't let you hurt anyone." The figure's head tilted slightly, as though it were studying him. Then, without a word, it extended a long, thin hand toward Oliver. A cold shiver ran down his spine as the hand came closer, but he stood his ground, refusing to back down. Suddenly, the mist around them thickened, swirling with a mind of its own. The figure's shape began to distort, becoming something else entirely, something even more unsettling. A high-pitched screech filled the air, and Oliver's blood ran cold as the shadowy form seemed to shift between reality and something far darker. "Oliver!" The raven's voice was frantic now. "Run! It's not what you think." But it was too late. The mist had engulfed him, and the last thing he saw before everything went black was the raven's desperate eyes. Oliver woke with a jolt, his head pounding. His surroundings were different, no longer the woods of Maplewood, but a dark, oppressive place where the air was thick with an unnatural energy. He could barely make out shapes in the distance, but they were moving. Slowly. As if they were closing in on him. He scrambled to his feet, his senses heightened. The shadowy figures from before were no longer a distant threat, they were right here, all around him. He could feel their presence like a heavy weight on his chest. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't let fear control him, not now. "Where am I?" Oliver muttered, his voice shaky. A voice, low and raspy, answered from the darkness. "You've crossed into our realm, detective." Oliver spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," the voice replied coldly. "You came to us. And now, you will stay." A chill ran down Oliver's spine. He realized that these beings weren't merely causing trouble in the town, they had plans, and they had been waiting for someone like him to come along. "But why?" "You won't stop us," the voice continued. "There are many like us. You are just one man, and we are many." Oliver's mind raced as he tried to piece together what he had learned so far. The animals, the strange occurrences, the mist, it was all connected. These shadowy figures were the source, but there was more to the story, something he had yet to uncover. The question was, why Maplewood? Before he could speak, a figure emerged from the shadows, its shape more defined now. It wasn't just one of the cloaked figures he had seen before. This one was different, larger, with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. "You're brave," the figure said, its voice like gravel scraping against stone. "But your bravery will not be enough to save you." Oliver stepped back, his mind whirling. The creature before him was a force to be reckoned with, and he was alone. But then, the raven's warning echoed in his ears, "It's not what you think." Suddenly, a flicker of hope sparked within him. He had a plan. He wasn't alone. The animals knew things, and they were always watching. But first, he needed to find a way out. The forest seemed to close in around Oliver as the mist thickened, swirling like a storm trapped in the still night air. The shadowy figures, those strange beings who had first appeared in the clearing, had vanished, yet their presence lingered, oppressive and unnerving. The silence around him was deafening. He could barely hear the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind, nothing but the thudding of his own heart in his chest. Oliver glanced over his shoulder. The raven, who had once been his guide, was now nowhere to be seen. The darkness felt more suffocating without its watchful eyes. Where did it go? He wondered. But there was no time for questions. The air was heavy with the sense that something was about to happen, something far worse than he could have imagined. For the first time since he had arrived in Maplewood, Oliver felt truly alone. The townsfolk's concerns, the strange happenings in the woods, the animals' cryptic warnings, they all had led him to this point. But now, in the heart of the forest, it seemed as though the stakes were higher than ever before. These figures weren't just causing disturbances, they were part of something much darker, something that had been lurking beneath the surface of Maplewood for longer than anyone realized. Suddenly, a rustling noise broke the silence. Oliver spun around, his senses on high alert. He could hear footsteps approaching, quick and uneven. He instinctively reached for his jacket, where he kept his pocket knife. "Who's there?" Oliver called, his voice sharp. His heart raced as he tried to make sense of the approaching noise. The footsteps stopped, but the silence that followed felt like a trap, waiting for him to make a mistake. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was a fox, its fur glowing in the dim moonlight. Oliver relaxed slightly, but he didn't let his guard down. "I thought you might need some help," the fox said, its voice soft yet tinged with urgency. Its eyes were wide, almost pleading. "You're in danger, detective. You've crossed into their territory." Oliver studied the fox for a moment. He had seen it around the village, darting in and out of the trees, but he hadn't paid it much attention before. Now, the fox seemed different, almost aware. More than just a creature of instinct. There was intelligence in those eyes, and an understanding that Oliver hadn't encountered before. "Danger?" Oliver repeated, his voice steady but filled with questions. "Who are they?" The fox's ears twitched as it glanced over its shoulder, as though making sure they weren't being followed. "They are the ones who have been hiding in the shadows. The ones who control the mist." "The mist?" Oliver echoed, trying to piece everything together. The raven had warned him about something, someone, but this was the first direct confirmation he had received that these figures weren't just figments of imagination. "They're not like us," the fox continued. "They come from a place beyond this world. And they're not content with just watching anymore. They want to take this town, take everything." The fox lowered its voice, almost a whisper. "I've seen them before. They can manipulate minds, bend them to their will. And they've already started. It's only a matter of time before they control everyone." Oliver's blood ran cold. If the fox was right, Maplewood wasn't just under threat, it was on the verge of being overtaken by forces beyond its control. He had to act quickly. "How do we stop them?" Oliver asked, his mind already racing with possibilities. But the fox shook its head. "It's not that simple," the fox said, a sad undertone to its voice. "You can't fight them head-on. They're too powerful for that. You have to find their source, the heart of the mist. That's where their power comes from. And if you can destroy it, you can stop them." Oliver nodded. He had no illusions about how difficult this would be, but he knew one thing for certain, he couldn't do it alone. "How do I find this heart of the mist?" Oliver asked, leaning in closer to the fox. "I'll guide you," the fox replied. "But you need to be careful. They'll be watching. They always are." Before Oliver could respond, there was a sharp noise behind him. He turned to find a figure emerging from the shadows, a tall, cloaked being, its face obscured by the folds of its hood. The air grew colder, and the sense of dread that had been building inside Oliver intensified. The fox bared its teeth, but it didn't move. "You shouldn't be here," it growled, its voice low and warning. The figure raised a gloved hand, a gesture that sent a shiver down Oliver's spine. "You should leave, fox," the figure said, its voice echoing through the forest like a distant thunderclap. "You've been meddling with things you don't understand." Oliver's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a direct threat, and it was here for him. The fox, however, didn't back down. It stood tall, its fur bristling with determination. "I've seen your kind before," it spat. "You don't scare me." The figure laughed, a hollow, cruel sound. "You should be afraid. You should be very afraid." In that instant, Oliver knew what he had to do. Without warning, he grabbed the fox's collar and pulled it toward him. "We need to move, now." The fox hesitated but didn't resist. Together, they darted into the trees, weaving through the thick underbrush as the shadowy figure gave chase. The mist had started to thicken again, and Oliver could barely make out the path in front of him. Every instinct screamed at him to run faster, to get away before the figure caught up with them. "We can't keep running forever," the fox panted. "We need to find shelter, somewhere they can't find us." Oliver nodded. There was a hollowed-out tree up ahead, an old oak that had stood for generations. It was the perfect place to hide, if only for a moment. But as they neared the tree, something far worse than the shadowy figure appeared. A pack of wolves, no, not just ordinary wolves, but creatures of the mist, with glowing eyes and claws that shimmered in the dark. They surrounded Oliver and the fox, cutting off their escape. The fox growled, ready to fight, but Oliver knew they were outmatched. He had to think quickly. In the distance, he could hear the sound of rushing water, the river. If they could make it to the water, the mist might lose its hold on them. "Follow me!" Oliver shouted. Without waiting for a response, he dashed toward the river, the fox at his heels. The wolves followed, their howls echoing in the night, but the closer Oliver and the fox got to the riverbank, the more the mist seemed to waver. It was a small window of opportunity, but it was their only chance. The stakes had just been raised. Time was running out, and there was no turning back now. The river roared in the distance, its waters crashing over the jagged rocks below. Oliver could feel the mist closing in behind them, its cold fingers clawing at his back, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The wolves, creatures of the mist, with their glowing eyes and ethereal power, were still hot on their heels, their snarls growing louder with each step. "Keep moving!" Oliver shouted to the fox, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We're almost there." The fox, its fur bristling with tension, barely nodded but kept pace, its eyes darting from side to side. The riverbank was just ahead, but Oliver's heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. The water's churning sound grew louder, and the mist seemed to retreat slightly as they drew closer. If they could make it to the river's edge, the mist might lose its grip on them. But the wolves were relentless. The first wolf lunged at them, its jaws snapping in the air, but the fox was quicker. With a sharp growl, it swerved, narrowly avoiding the wolf's teeth, and dashed forward. Oliver felt his pulse race. He couldn't let the fox face this alone. They had to stick together. "Run!" the fox yelped, its voice sharp with panic. "Now!" They reached the river's edge, the violent current crashing against the rocks below. Oliver barely had time to think before another wolf pounced, its claws slashing at the air. The fox darted left, leading the wolf away from Oliver. But there were too many wolves now, and their glowing eyes were everywhere. Oliver knew that the moment they slowed, they would be surrounded. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack of thunder overhead, and the sky lit up with a flash of lightning. The mist seemed to writhe in response, but it was not just the weather, it was the force behind it. Oliver knew that whatever was controlling the mist, it was getting stronger, more desperate. The wolves were just the beginning. They were nothing compared to what was coming. The fox's voice broke through the storm. "We have to reach the heart of the mist, now." But the path to the heart of the mist was perilous, and the wolves were only the first obstacle. Oliver turned to the fox, a grim realization settling in. "We can't outrun them forever. We need a plan." The fox paused for a brief moment, its eyes narrowing as if it were calculating their chances. "The mist is its source of power. If we can destroy it, we can break the wolves' hold on us, and on the town. But you must be the one to do it, detective." Oliver stared at the fox, a cold realization sinking in. "Me?" His voice cracked, but the urgency in the fox's gaze left no room for hesitation. "You're the only one who can," the fox said, its voice low and intense. "You've been chosen. The animals trust you. You must destroy the source, or everything will be lost." A sense of weight pressed on Oliver's chest. He had come this far because of a calling, one that was growing clearer with each passing moment. The town, the animals, the mist, it all led to this. It was up to him to stop it. But could he? In that instant, the wolves lunged again. Oliver didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fox by the collar and threw it into the underbrush. "Get back!" he shouted. Then, without thinking, he sprinted toward the river, adrenaline flooding his veins. The water, wild and powerful, was his only chance. If he could make it to the other side, he might be able to confront whatever was behind the mist. But as he neared the river, the earth trembled beneath his feet. A growl, deep and guttural, echoed through the forest, and the ground split open with a violent crack. From the depths of the earth, a figure emerged, tall, dark, and looming, like a manifestation of the mist itself. The creature was made of swirling fog and darkness, its form constantly shifting, impossible to define. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. Oliver froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure spoke, its voice like thunder. "You think you can stop me? You think you can destroy what is already within you?" The ground trembled again, and the wolves circled closer, their snarls rising in pitch. Oliver's breath caught in his throat as the full weight of the situation hit him. He had reached the climax, the moment when everything would either be destroyed or saved. The creature before him was the heart of the mist. It was the source of everything that had been happening to Maplewood. And now, it was in front of him, its power overwhelming and its intent clear. But there was no turning back. Oliver clenched his fists, feeling the power of the detective inside him rise to the surface. He had solved countless mysteries, faced dangers before, but this was different. This wasn't just a puzzle to solve. It was a fight for survival, for the town, and for everything he had come to care about. The fox appeared beside him, its eyes wide with fear. "You have to destroy it, now." Oliver nodded, his mind working fast. He couldn't take on this creature directly. But the mist was vulnerable to one thing. The river. It was pure, untamed, and it had the power to wash away the unnatural forces that the mist had brought to life. With a sudden movement, Oliver lunged toward the water, grabbing a large rock from the shore and hurling it into the river. The splash echoed through the forest, and for a split second, the mist seemed to recoil. It was subtle, but enough to give him a fleeting hope. "Now!" Oliver shouted, turning back to face the creature. "The water! We need to use the river." The creature's face twisted into something monstrous, its form shifting violently as the mist thickened around them. "You are nothing," it roared. "I will crush you." But Oliver didn't flinch. He raced toward the river's edge, drawing the creature's attention. As the mist swirled around him, he could feel its oppressive presence, but he knew now that it was weak. The river's power, its force, was something the mist couldn't control. It was the one thing it couldn't touch. Oliver reached into the water, feeling the cool current wrap around his hand. The moment he made contact with it, the mist began to lose its form. It struggled, but it couldn't fight the river's pull. In that instant, Oliver made a decision. He clenched his fists, the strength of his resolve carrying him forward. "This ends now." With everything he had, he plunged his hands into the river, calling on its raw power. The mist howled in fury, but it was no match for the water's unrelenting force. It began to dissipate, unraveling like a tapestry torn apart by a storm. The wolves, too, began to fade, their glowing eyes dimming, their forms becoming nothing more than shadows. And then, the silence. Oliver stood there, breathless, as the last remnants of the mist evaporated into the air. The wolves were gone, the figure had vanished, and Maplewood was safe. For now. The fox, panting beside him, gave a single, approving nod. "You did it. You saved us all." But as the mist cleared, Oliver knew this victory was only a chapter in a larger story. There were still mysteries to uncover, and dangers lurking in the unseen corners of the world. And for a detective like Oliver Finch, the journey was far from over. But But tonight, at least, he had one. As the last remnants of the mist faded, the world seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The once stifling air now felt lighter, the oppressive weight that had settled over Maplewood lifting with the dissipating fog. The wolves, creatures of darkness, no longer under the control of the creature at the heart of the mist, had vanished without a trace. The eerie, glowing eyes that had haunted Oliver and the fox were now nothing but distant memories. Oliver stood at the riverbank, the cool waters lapping against his boots, and allowed himself a moment of stillness. The storm had passed. The night air, once thick with tension, was now calm. He looked around, taking in the familiar sights of the forest that had felt so alien just hours before. The trees stood tall, their branches reaching up to the sky, free from the shadow of the mist. It was over. Maplewood was safe. For now, at least. The fox, still breathing heavily from the chase, padded up beside him. Its fur was matted with droplets of water, and its usual sleek appearance was now tousled and wild. But in its eyes, there was a flicker of something else, relief, yes, but also a deeper understanding. Oliver could feel it too. They had faced something unimaginable, something no one in Maplewood could have predicted, but together, they had overcome it. Is it truly over? Oliver asked, his voice low, uncertain. The battle had been intense, and though the creature in the mist was gone, he couldn't help but wonder if there were more threats lurking in the shadows. The fox sat beside him, looking up with those sharp, knowing eyes. For now, yes. The mist has lost its grip, but there will always be more mysteries, more dangers. That's the way of the world. You can't stop being a detective once the case is closed. Oliver chuckled softly, the tension beginning to melt away as he allowed himself to relax for the first time in what felt like days. Guess I've got a lot more work ahead of me, then, he said, glancing back at the forest, where the last traces of mist were being swallowed by the light of the rising moon. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had just accomplished settling in. Maplewood was safe, but the fox was right, Oliver wasn't done yet. As a detective, there would always be more to uncover, more mysteries to solve. But for tonight, the town would rest easy. I guess this means you're not done with me yet, huh? Oliver said, giving the fox a wry smile. The fox let out a soft huff, its eyes glinting with amusement. Not by a long shot. You may have saved Maplewood, but the animals still need your help. You're the only one who can communicate with us. You're our voice, Oliver. You always have been. Oliver's smile faded slightly as he considered the fox's words. The truth was, the animals had always been more than just a part of his investigations. They had become his allies, his companions in the truest sense. They had guided him, helped him solve mysteries that no human could have understood. And now, it seemed, his journey with them was far from over. As the fox began to turn and lead him back toward the heart of the forest, Oliver found himself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Only a few days ago, he had been investigating a simple case, one that seemed like just another missing persons report. But now, he had faced the supernatural, fought back an ancient evil, and forged a bond with the creatures of the forest. He wasn't just a detective anymore. He was something more. The return to the town was slow, the streets of Maplewood eerily quiet in the aftermath of the mist. But Oliver wasn't afraid. The people, unaware of what had transpired, would go about their lives as usual. The darkness had been driven away, and the night would resume its peaceful rhythm. But Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Something larger, more dangerous. The mist had been defeated, yes, but the true force behind it, whatever had orchestrated the wolves, the fog, and the chaos, was still a mystery. And mysteries were Oliver's calling. As they reached the outskirts of Maplewood, the fox stopped and turned to look at him. You've changed, Oliver, it said, its voice gentle but firm. You've faced something you never expected. But there's more to you now. The animals see it. They trust you more than ever before. Oliver met the fox's gaze and felt the weight of its words sink in. The animals had always been his allies, but now, there was a deeper bond between them. He had proven himself. He had faced impossible odds and come out victorious. The bond that had been forming between him and the animals was no longer just one of necessity. It was something deeper, something irrevocable. "I couldn't have done it without you," Oliver said, his voice filled with gratitude. The fox had been his guide, his companion, through the entire ordeal. Without its help, he would have never made it this far. The fox nodded, its ears twitching. "And you won't have to do it alone again. But remember, there's always more to learn. Always more to discover." Oliver nodded in agreement. There was always more. That was the nature of being a detective. The work never ended. As the fox disappeared into the forest, blending with the shadows, Oliver made his way back to the heart of the town. The streets were still quiet, the windows dark. People were beginning to stir, waking up to the peaceful morning, unaware of the battle that had raged in the night. But Oliver knew. He knew the truth. And he also knew that this victory, as sweet as it was, would not be his last. He would always be chasing the next mystery, uncovering the unknown, and finding answers to questions that no one else even thought to ask. With a final look at the horizon, Oliver made his way toward the small office that had once been just a place of work. Now, it felt like home. The mysteries of Maplewood, and the world beyond, awaited him. And he was ready. The journey of Oliver Finch, detective of Maplewood, was far from over. It had only just begun. As the sun rose over the small town of Maplewood, its rays painted the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The fog had lifted completely, and the once pervasive mist was now just a distant memory. The town that had been caught in a strange and frightening battle for survival had finally returned to its peaceful state. Oliver stood at the edge of the town, gazing out over the familiar landscape he had protected, the weight of the events slowly beginning to settle. He took a deep breath, his chest rising with the cool morning air. The tension he had carried for days was finally gone, leaving only a sense of accomplishment and a lingering, quiet exhaustion. The forest, once ominous and teeming with unnatural danger, now looked just as it always had, calm, serene, and untouchable. "I can't believe it's over," he whispered to himself. "I never thought I'd see the day." The fox appeared beside him, its orange fur glowing in the morning light. It had become a constant companion throughout the journey, its wisdom and sharp instincts guiding Oliver through the darkest moments. The two of them had faced incredible odds, and now, standing together in the glow of the new day, they shared a moment of peace. "It's over for now," the fox said with a knowing look. "But there's always more to learn, more to discover. That's the life of a detective." Oliver nodded. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." His voice was steady, but deep down, he knew the truth. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The town had been saved, but there would always be more mysteries to uncover. The animals of Maplewood still needed him. They had become his allies, his partners, and now, more than ever, Oliver understood the responsibility he carried. "You've changed," the fox continued, its voice soft yet firm. "Not just in the way you solve mysteries, but in who you are. You've become something more." Oliver glanced at the fox, surprised by the weight of the words. "More?" he asked, almost skeptical. The fox's eyes gleamed with wisdom. "Yes. You've learned the value of trust, of partnership, and of looking beyond the surface. You're no longer just solving cases. You're protecting something much deeper, something far more important than just the town. You're protecting the bond between humans and animals." A sense of warmth spread through Oliver, and for the first time, he allowed himself to truly process the significance of what had transpired. He had started as a detective, just another person trying to make a living in a small town. But now, through his journey, he had become a bridge between worlds, between the humans of Maplewood and the animals who shared the land. He was no longer an outsider in the world of the animals. He was part of it. As the fox turned to leave, its tail flicked in the direction of the forest, Oliver felt the quiet pull of the next adventure. The animals would always need him. He knew now that he could never fully leave behind the world of mysteries that had become his life. "Do you think there will always be more?" he asked, his voice quiet. The fox paused for a moment, then turned back to face him, its eyes filled with unspoken understanding. "There will always be more," it said. "But you'll be ready." With that, the fox disappeared into the trees, leaving Oliver standing at the edge of the town, a silent promise in the air between them. Later that morning, the people of Maplewood began to stir. They went about their daily routines, unaware of the dark forces that had been at work during the night. Life, as they knew it, had returned to normal. The town felt safe once again, and its people were free to enjoy their lives without the fear of the strange, unnatural happenings that had plagued them. But for Oliver, there was no going back to the simple life of a detective. He had seen too much, learned too much, and now the path before him was clear. He had a purpose to fulfill, one that stretched beyond solving mundane mysteries. His bond with the animals was stronger than ever, and it was clear that Maplewood's safety relied on more than just the human community. As he walked back toward his small office, the familiar wooden door creaked open, and he was greeted by the scent of paper and ink, the artifacts of a career that had felt so different before the mist had come. Oliver took a seat at his desk, his mind still racing with the events of the past days, but also with the quiet realization that his journey was far from over. The animals of Maplewood needed him, and he was ready to stand by them. He opened the drawer of his desk, pulling out a small notebook where he had scribbled down his thoughts and observations during his investigation. It had started as a simple case, but now it held the details of an entire world that he had barely understood before. Flipping through the pages, Oliver paused at the last entry, the one he had written the night of the storm, just before the final confrontation with the mist. In that entry, he had written, "The mist is gone. But the connection between us and the animals is stronger than ever. They are not just witnesses to our world, they are active participants. And I am the one who has to listen, understand, and protect them. This is my responsibility now." He closed the notebook with a soft sigh, feeling a deep sense of closure. He had solved the mystery of the mist, but it had led him to something even greater, a deeper understanding of his place in the world. The animals were no longer just clues in a case. They were partners, and together, they would face whatever came next. As Oliver leaned back in his chair, a quiet peace settled over him. The mist had been defeated. Maplewood was safe. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: Oliver Finch was ready for whatever mystery came next. His journey had only just begun. Through his experiences, Oliver had learned the importance of trust, companionship, and understanding. He had grown from a detective solving simple cases to a protector of the bond between humans and animals. His journey had shown him that there was always more to discover, and with each mystery he solved, he had become a more complete version of himself, a bridge between two worlds. The ultimate lesson was clear: in life, true understanding comes not just from solving problems, but from listening and learning from those who are often overlooked or misunderstood.